A special WDBJ7 presentation.
Theirs is a story of one small American town that went to war and died on Omaha Beach.
The final salute to the heroes of D-Day.
John Beam, Lieutenant, U.S. Navy.
All week, as the world marked the 75th anniversary of D-Day, your hometown station showcased the role troops from our region played that day. From the beaches of Normandy,
about 200 or 300 yards from shore, we encounter artillery fire.
To the ceremony in Bedford.
We need to know the enormity of what took place that day.
Stories of bravery and sacrifice.
The things they carried on D-Day. One by one, how they helped tell the story of D-Day.
Plus, the former WDBJ7 anchor who went to Normandy.
There is no question there was no greater story for me in my 40-year career.
The history, the impact, a special presentation.
And the rocket's red glare.
Your hometown station honors the heroes of D-Day.
We thank you for joining us this Sunday morning. I'm Robin Reed.
And I'm Jean Jadhun. This week, stories of courage and sacrifice were front and center at the National D-Day Memorial in Bedford. We want to use the next 30 minutes to take you back to those moments. If you've ever had the opportunity to visit the D-Day Memorial, you know it is an impressive operation. This is Air 7 video captured as the sun rose.
And this week, the skies looked a little different. As the 75th commemoration got underway, you can see the World War II planes took to the air for a special tribute. It was an impressive and emotional ceremony.
More than 10,000 people came out to remember the day that turned the tide of World War II. It began with an aerial salute as the sound of World War II planes roared overhead.
O'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming.
Thousands came out, including veterans, grandparents, and children, and even the Vice President of the United States, Mike Pence, all to salute our nation and those who made the ultimate sacrifice.
Theirs was a story of one small American town that went to war and died on Omaha Beach. And you stormed the beaches and faced the shadow of death without fear.
As aircraft flew overhead, dignitaries read the words from the men who were there on the beaches of Normandy. Their words told the fear and horror of that day.
All this is going through your mind. What am I doing here in this airplane? Why did I volunteer? Am I crazy?
And then the words of D-Day veteran and memorial founder Bob Slaughter.
The water was turning red from the blood. An enemy gunner cut him down as he staggered and fell to the sand. I can still hear him screaming.
You are the pride of our nation, and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Perhaps no hometown understands the price of freedom quite so much as Bedford. Leanna Scacchetti shows us how their vow to never forget goes well beyond the commemoration held this week.
If you ever let yourself wonder what it was like to storm the beaches of Normandy June 6, 1944, your imagination is magnified inside Bedford's National D-Day Memorial.
It's to all of those communities in our country that nurtured these citizen soldiers who went away to war, and so many of them never came home.
April Cheek-Messier heads up the D-Day Memorial Foundation. A storyteller and history buff at heart, she knows the names of all 22 Bedford boys and knows the empty spaces they left behind.
It was certainly a time of deep grieving and mourning that I think would happen for many, many, many years.
19 young men from the small town, most side by side, were slaughtered within the first 15 minutes on the beach. Days after June 6th, the news reached Bedford's telegraph operator.
It begins telling her one after another that Bedford, we have casualties.
It was the greatest loss per capita of any town. Little was known about what happened on D-Day by families at home until a veteran with a vision helped spur the movement for the National D-Day Memorial. Bedford stepped up to the plate.
As has been the Foundation's practice for previous public programs, we shall dispense with formal introductions.
President Bush came for the dedication in 2001 to see that vision come to life. A reality made possible with the help of a young Cheek Messier, a Bedford native who doesn't have to imagine the pain felt by an entire town.
And it just really gives you an insight into what one generation did for all of us.
In Bedford, Leanna Scacchetti, WDBJ7.
National D-Day Memorial did not exist in 1994 when the world marked the 50th anniversary of the Normandy landing, and the story of Bedford's sacrifice wasn't as widely known as it is today. Joe DeShiel looks back with former WDBJ7 anchor Keith Humphrey.
There is no question there was no greater story for me in my 40-year career.
For Keith Humphrey, the story started with two men, two of the Bedford boys who survived D-Day. Ray Nance, a lieutenant who wondered why he had been spared while so many others died.
They never come home to get married and have children, families. They were denied that. Why?
And Roy Stevens, who lost his twin brother Ray on D-Day.
He says, I won't get back here. And I got after him for saying that. He was right.
The thing that strikes me over and over again from my memory and looking back on it is, to a man, every one of them knew after the fact that if they survived, it was the luck of the draw.
Humphrey and WDBJ7 photographer Scott Ayers set out to tell their stories and to hear from those who suffered here at home as the extent of Bedford's loss became clear.
The Roanoke operator typed to me, she says, we have casualties. And then I knew that they were coming, and one just repeated to the other.
Humphrey and Ayers would also travel to Normandy with D-Day veterans, including Roanoke's Bob Slaughter, who spearheaded the push for the National D-Day Memorial.
The day we were on Omaha Beach with all of the troops from Virginia was like nothing I have ever experienced. I sat in a live shot from the cemetery.
Suddenly all these men seemed 19 again.
They were buoyant and jubilant and youthful, and just, they were, hallelujah, we survived and we're back to celebrate that. And it was fun to watch.
25 years later, the emotions of those moments still linger.
Bob Sales was talking about how what a great day it was, June 6, 1994.
You know, we've had a week of good old-fashioned patriotism here. We've honored these dead, but you know we're going home, and they're going to stay.
Now we're going home, and they are staying here. It was touching to him and to me at the time, and still.
Still bringing back the emotion. You have heard the tales of the Bedford boys, the 19 men killed on the beaches of Normandy, but you may not have heard of the 20th Bedford boy who gave the ultimate sacrifice. Leanna Scacchetti shows how his family is keeping his memory alive.
It gets your attention, doesn't it?
Here at the National D-Day Memorial, your attention is something James Woodford has been working toward for a long time. As a Bedford native, he knows the price this town paid on June 6, 1944.
Just got to remember the boys, all of them.
All of them, not just the 19 boys of Company A everyone has come to know, but one more young man, the 20th, whose sacrifice was no less great.
I'm just thankful he's not forgotten, because it seems like he may have been.
Woodford is the great-nephew of Benjamin R. Hubbard, killed on D-Day while serving with Company F. Woodford grew up knowing about his great-uncle, but details from his grandmother, Hubbard's sister, were scarce.
We saw a picture and we would ask who he was, and she just said he died on Omaha Beach.
Years later, Woodford and his wife began a mission to learn more. At the same time,
so this is Benjamin Hubbard.
The D-Day Memorial Foundation was doing the same thing.
He's not a name that actually came up a lot over the years.
They believe Hubbard grew up in Huddleston and later moved between Bedford and Roanoke County, but died at 28 or 29, 10 years before Woodford was even born. It's a fact that doesn't make Hubbard's untimely death any less meaningful.
Well, it's my grandmother's brother. And to die on that beach, it's tough.
Tougher still to think that Hubbard's life might have been forgotten. And that is why
There it is, right there.
Woodford is honoring his great uncle in the memorial's Gold Star Garden, a brick laying the foundation of an everlasting tribute.
It's good.
It's, again, just so important to document the lives of these individuals and to tell their stories, because that's what really resonates with people. It's the stories.
And so, with Woodford's help, Hubbard's story is now one that has the attention he believes his great uncle so rightly deserved.
It's a good honor.
In Bedford, Leanna Scacchetti, WDBJ7.
There is still much more to come on this special edition of WDBJ7.
Up next, building a lasting legacy, how the children of the D-Day survivors no longer with us are making sure their history is not lost.
I can't imagine going through all that. I just can't imagine it, you know? It's just horrific.
Many of the heroes who survived the Allied landing at Normandy are no longer here to speak about those moments. Instead, their legacy must live on through their children.
Tim Saunders caught up with one of the women who has a unique tie to two of the famed Bedford boys.
Twin brothers, torn apart by D-Day. The story of Roy and Ray Stevens has been told widely in recent years. That wasn't the case when Roy's daughter Kathy was a child.
All we knew growing up was that he lost Ray.
Ray and Roy Stevens were Bedford boys, members of the 29th Infantry who stormed France on June 6, 1944. Ray died on the beach at Normandy. Roy discovered his brother's dog tags on a grave days later. He participated in one of the most important military campaigns of all time and lived to talk about it, but talk he did not.
When the D-Day Memorial came about, that's when he came out of his shell because he met more vets, and that really brought him out.
Stevens shared his story with WDBJ7's Keith Humphrey in 1994. He talked about the last time he saw his brother, just before the two separated for the D-Day mission.
He took his hand out to shake my hand, and I said, I'll meet you at Verville Samir, there in at Fox. I'll take your hand there. And I know he just dropped his head. I just thought to myself, why didn't I take his hand? But I didn't.
That's haunted him for all his life. So when he finally passed away, I said, they're in heaven shaking hands and hugging.
Stevens says her father was far more open about his experience in later years, working to educate younger generations about his experience.
He really enjoyed going around to schools and talking to particularly the elementary kids.
Roy Stevens thought it was vital for people to understand the significance of D-Day. Today, Kathy carries on that part of her father's legacy.
I think it's very important that the children, know this and understand it, because they fought for our freedom, and that's what we have today because of that.
In Bedford, Tim Saunders, WDBJ7.
There is a lot we can learn from even the smallest things the soldiers of D-Day carried with them.
The artifacts didn't win the war, the men did.
Well, we're going to take a closer look at important artifacts that are housed right in Bedford. Stay with us. A watch, a postcard, or a pair of boots. What can these artifacts tell us about World War II and the lives behind the uniforms? The things that some soldiers carried on D-Day are now stored in a basement in Bedford.
Siobhan McGurl takes us inside the archive room at the National D-Day Memorial Foundation, where more than 11,000 artifacts help shed light on a bigger story.
In this crowded room, you can pick any box off any shelf. Open it, and you are almost guaranteed to find treasure.
It's chilling sometimes to look at some of these artifacts and know that in some cases a man died holding this, these tangible reminders of what happened in World War II.
John Long is in charge of this room, where you walk between war medals, pictures, and uniforms, bringing you closer to the most personal aspects surrounding June 6, 1944.
This is one of the most poignant items in our collection.
And in some cases, the exact moment everything changed.
And it is stopped forever at 8:25 a.m., the moment we assume that he died. So this is actually recording the moment of the death of a D-Day hero.
Most items were donated to the memorial by family, like these boots.
That's the way he wanted it. He wanted these to be preserved.
Long carefully curates, numbers, and stores each of the artifacts until the foundation can build a museum. Now at 11,000 items, some still stand out, like this heartbreaking letter from a devoted wife to her husband.
It'll not be long until you can be done with all that and come home and enjoy a few months of quiet and calm. All my love is yours, Lynn.
She did not know that her husband had been killed 5 weeks prior.
It can be very emotionally stirring.
But it's the emotions, the handwritten notes, and the endless boxes that humanize a moment in time that changed history.
The artifacts didn't win the war, the men did. And the fact that they may have worn those dog tags is a reminder of what happened and why we need to remember it.
The foundation is in the very early planning stages for museum and educational center for those thousands of artifacts. But until then, they did just dedicate this educational hut where some of those items will be on display. In Bedford, Siobhan McGurl, WDBJ7.
The National D-Day Memorial was dedicated back in 2001, but it took years of planning and pushing to get this project done.
Coming up next, the story of one of the biggest advocates who helped shape the tribute that we visit today.
Samuel Berry, Petty Officer 2nd Class, U.S. Navy. He served as a combat medic on D-Day at Omaha Beach. After a month in France, he was sent to the Pacific, where he served in Guam, the Philippines, Iwo Jima, and off the coast of Japan. John Bertrand, 1st Lieutenant, U.S. Army Air Force.
We have brought you the stories of the Bedford Boys, but many more from our region were in the first wave of soldiers who landed on the beach at Normandy.
One of them was Sergeant Bob Slaughter from Roanoke, who became one of the most passionate advocates for the National D-Day Memorial. Senior reporter Joe DeShiel has his story.
They were firing on A Company, but they were also firing from up in this cliff down at us.
Bob Slaughter on the beach at Normandy, explaining what Roanoke's D Company encountered during the D-Day landing.
I was frightened, of course, our first combat.
In 1994, he told WDBJ7's Keith Humphrey that he and fellow soldiers from the Virginia National Guard thought it was a great honor when they were selected to spearhead the assault.
At what point did you realize that was a mistake?
Oh, about 200 yards offshore when they opened up on us.
Slaughter and other D-Day survivors would return to Normandy for the 50th anniversary in 1994.
You could see the warmth of the people.
He was one of 4 D-Day veterans to walk with President Bill Clinton on Omaha Beach. He would share his D-Day memories with historians, write his own book about his experiences, and attend the premiere of the movie Saving Private Ryan in 1998.
There's so many other people that deserve more than I do.
Creating the National D-Day Memorial became Slaughter's mission. He was an early and passionate advocate. He pushed local governments to find an appropriate site, and he led efforts to raise money for the project. He was there in June 2001 when President George Bush attended the dedication, and his advocacy continued even as financial problems mounted in the months after the memorial opened. He died in 2012 at the age of 87. 2 years later, the National D-Day Memorial unveiled a bust of Slaughter, honoring a humble man and American hero who made sure the sacrifice of others is never forgotten. Joe DeShiel, WDBJ7.
When it comes to a project such as the National D-Day Memorial, some of the most impactful work is in the small details.
We're going to take a closer look at some of the symbolism after this break. The National D-Day Memorial is an expansive site filled with a variety of monuments. Air 7 showing us yet another view from above. When the memorial was designed, careful attention was given to the finer details.
WDBJ7's Tim Saunders explains some of the symbolism you may not know about.
There's a story in every step at the National D-Day Memorial.
The memorial is laid out to chronologically tell the story of D-Day.
Installations at the 50-acre site follow the timeline of Operation Overlord, starting with the planning and preparation stage, represented in the memorial's English garden.
When visitors come here, what they find is our garden is in the shape of the Schaaf patch. And SHAEF stood for the Supreme Headquarters of the Allied Expeditionary Force, and those were essentially the planners for Operation Overlord, the invasion of occupied France.
At the head of the garden, there's a statue of Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied forces on D-Day, perched under what appears to be a concrete gazebo. The structure represents an English folly called Southwick House, where planning for the D-Day landing took place. On the inside ceiling, a map of the invasion in small mosaic tile.
The garden also has all of Eisenhower's commanders. We always point out the various generals that he was working with.
The main plaza depicts the D-Day landing itself. Blue concrete represents the English Channel, separated by white lines into 5 sections, which symbolize the beaches invaded by Allied forces. It's bordered by a reflecting pool, filled with imagery of soldiers storming the coast.
One of the most striking scenes, of course, is the abstract replica there of the Higgins boat, or the LCBPs that were used on D-Day, with a ramp down in the front. And this is what the troops would have come in on D-Day.
A high wall bordering the reflecting pool represents the cliffs of Normandy, scaled by soldiers depicted in bronze. They lead to a Victory Plaza, featuring the memorial's iconic Overlord Arch.
It is exactly 44 feet 6 inches tall for the date of D-Day, June 6, 1944.
The arch is flanked by 12 flags, one for each nation in the Allied Expeditionary Force. At the center, a solemn statue called the Final Tribute, designed to look like the temporary graves of soldiers after the invasion. It's a powerful statement that to secure victory, America and its allies had to pay a steep price. In Bedford, Tim Saunders, WDBJ 7.
So many interesting details. There is much more to the stories we have brought you this morning. To hear full interviews and new perspectives from our reporters, listen to the Final Salute podcast, available on SoundCloud.
And you can re-watch any of the stories that you have seen today, plus new editions from the WDBJ7 archive on our website, of course, WDBJ7.com. You know, Jean, they told us on the day of the ceremony that they set out 10,000 chairs, and they filled them all, and probably a little bit more. It was a huge crowd that came out for this very special occasion.
And it was very nice to see veterans from World War II who were there, and to see them honored one by one. Each veteran from World War II was honored for their service.
Each so humble as they sat there and, you know, just appreciated what was happening.
We want to thank you for joining us this morning. Have a good day.
This special presentation has been brought to you by FNS Building Innovations. FNS proudly salutes our veterans and patriots.